Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Movie Blues. Today on the show, we're going to be going over 50 of my favorite horror movie gems of all time. But before we get started with the list, I think we should probably set the mood. Hello, and welcome to the Movie Blues list of 50 horror movies that you need to see now. Of course, the term hidden gem means different things to different people, so the best way that I can sum this list up is by telling you that these are 50 of my favorite horror movies of all time, recommendations that I've been holding on to for decades, spanning every subgenre that horror has to offer, from the slasher, to torture porn, to found footage, to even a few documentaries. This is a master list of some of the scariest, most unsettling, and potentially sickening horror movies I've ever seen in my life. This list will not only be presented as spoiler-free, but will also include information on where to stream or rent these films. This list was actually cut out of 150 that I have selected for future videos, so if you want to see more content like this, make sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, and like this video. And so without any further ado, delay, or preamble, let's get this list started.
Black Mountainside.
Someone was sneaking around the outpost last night.
I don't know, maybe it was an animal.
For Christ's sake, that was no animal.
From Helix to The Head, from The Thing to Season 1 of The Terror, there is simply nothing I love more than some bleak, Arctic horror. And Black Mountainside makes for a satisfyingly chilly ride. When a group of archaeologists unearth a mysterious 10,000-year-old structure in the wilds of northern Canada, an ancient entity of unknowable terror is released. Ominous, brooding, and full of the kind of dreaded tension found in the best folk horror movies, Black Mountainside has all the best and most alienating elements of classics like The Shining, on a shoestring, independent budget.
Sputnik.
If you're looking for a sleek and maturely handled sci-fi creature feature, look no further than Sputnik, an action-packed and horrifying body horror masterpiece. When the lone survivor of a Russian spaceship incident begins exhibiting strange behavior, and even stranger alterations to his physiology, he becomes the subject of governmental tests that lead to shocking and horrifying conclusions. A gross and unforgettable body horror yarn begins to unravel amidst a political action thriller, as Sputnik checks all the boxes for a great sci-fi horror gem.
TimeCrimes.
Movies like The Triangle and shows like Dark are known for being pillars of the Time Travel Hall of Fame. But TimeCrimes from 2007 deserves to be at the top of this sci-fi subgenre as well. A man unknowingly falls into a time loop on a serene day in the Spanish countryside, setting off a chain of mind-boggling events that threaten to unravel his entire existence over the course of a single afternoon. Part slasher film, part sci-fi film, and a movie that is somehow as complex as it is stunningly simplistic. TimeCrimes is a complete head trip that feels like Primer by way of John Carpenter's Halloween, a true temporal horror classic.
The Children.
You're gonna want to hire a babysitter because The Children from 2008 will have you dying to run away from your kids. Successfully hitting that sweet spot of creepy kid horror can be a pretty difficult task, but The Children is a rousing example of how terrifying the concept of evil kids can be when handled seriously and shockingly. Two families meet up at a remote country cabin over Christmas Eve, which begins as an idyllic vacation and then descends into jet black horror, as the kids of both families suddenly turn on their parents with deadly results. This is a morbid, violent, and nightmare-inducing horror film with loads of jaw-dropping moments and unforgettable turns that will leave you looking over your shoulder at your own brood with suspicion and fear.
The Coffee Table.
I walked into this movie assuming that it would be a bad, single-concept, Blumhouse-style horror movie about a haunted coffee table. But goddamn, it felt good to be wrong. Well, maybe it didn't feel good, because The Coffee Table is one of the most bleak and horrific movies I've ever seen in my life. But it was amazing to see how much morbid dread could be extracted from a simple premise like this for 2 hours of pure misery. A struggling family with a newborn baby purchases an ornate coffee table from a local furniture store. That leads to a very violent incident that will knock the wind out of you and fill you with dread for the rest of the film. This is an excellent perversion of the Chekhov's gun concept, and a horror film that starts with a simple premise, which evolves into a dark character study, plumbing the absolute bottom depths of human evil in unforgettable ways. A scarring, surprising, and unspeakably horrific movie experience that will leave you absolutely gutted.
Inside.
This film has been my favorite slasher of all time since its release in 2007, and in my humble opinion, Inside is one of the best horror films of the modern era. 4 months after her husband's tragic death, a pregnant woman spends a peaceful night alone in her quiet house in France, which is forcefully interrupted by a mysterious stalker with deadly intentions. This is a Hitchcockian masterclass in both the slasher and home invasion subgenres, offering up one of the most unnerving and disgusting horror films in history. Terrifyingly tense and shockingly gory, Inside is one of the darkest and most sinister horror films out there, if you can somehow stomach it. The final frame of this movie will stick to you like glue, making Inside one of the most memorable nightmares in the history of horror.
The Empty Man.
What starts as a rather simplistic yarn about a retired cop investigating the disappearance of a young girl, The Empty Man patiently devolves into a Lovecraftian head trip that tumbles down a well of cosmic and mysterious horror. While the first third of The Empty Man is a simply executed adaptation of a Slender Man-like creepypasta, the rest of the film goes to some truly unbelievable and extra-dimensional places. The Empty Man is a macabre, mysterious, and ultimately satisfying descent into darkness.
Coming home in the dark.
Got a whole place to yourselves. I should probably introduce myself, shouldn't I? I'm a magician. I make things disappear.
Bare bones, bleak, and relentless, Coming Home in the Dark follows a family vacation on an idyllic afternoon in New Zealand that descends into utter brutality. Falling somewhere between Speak No Evil and Eden Lake, this film is a brash and brutal, yet super simplistic horror experience that lingers in the darkest scenario for the longest lengths. As a shocking situation that kicks off in the first minutes of the film, endlessly spirals out of control until the credits roll. Beware, this movie is an utterly devastating yet classically horrifying slice of familial trauma.
The Night House.
Do you guys believe in ghosts? I think there's something in my house.
Director David Bruckner's The Night House is easily the most tension-soaked American horror film since 2020's The Invisible Man, offering up a truly cerebral and haunting experience. Star Rebecca Hall turns in a hypnotically unhinged virtuoso performance, commanding a severity that the film requires to buy into its various webs of ever-increasingly complex and frightening plot developments. Visually engaging, often terrifying, and bathed in an escalating wash of tension, The Night House is a near-perfect horror film that follows a despondent widow as she begins to uncover her recently deceased husband's web of disturbing secrets. Hitchcock would be proud of this hypnotic, mind-bending thriller.
Incantation.
你们相信祝福吗？
Incantation is a Taiwanese found-footage horror film that follows a woman who suffers a curse after breaking a local religious taboo, setting off an unstoppable wave of terror that threatens her family nearly 6 years after the incident took place. This is a positively mind-bending horror film, and is easily one of the most complex and memorable entries in the found-footage subgenre, mixing the best elements of J-horror, religious horror, and Blair Witch levels of found-footage dread. Incantation is arguably one of the top 10 modern horror masterpieces to come out of the found-footage world. A goosebump-inducing film full of rich lore, lush foreign locations, and unforgettably chilling moments, Incantation is truly a curse worth enduring.
Wicked City.
Ever wonder what it would be like if David Cronenberg made an anime? Wicked City isn't a scary movie, but for any fan of anime and body horror, this is an absolute undisputed masterpiece. Weird, disgusting, and chock full of some of the most perverse cyberpunk body horror ever devised, Wicked City is a positively sinful experience you'll likely never forget. Following a secret police force in a neon-drenched futuristic noir city where demons coexist with mankind, this film is an anime hidden gem with some truly disgusting set pieces. If you're looking for an erotic horror epic that makes cyberpunk edgerunners look like Teletubbies, look no further than Wicked City.
Sun.
Stylish, expertly acted, and full of absolutely harrowing moments, Sun is a near-perfect horror ride that only shows signs of wear and tear in its final few reveals. Regardless, this is a mature, violent, and chilling experience that should be added to the pantheon of modern horror classics. When a young boy falls ill to a mysterious illness, his mother must decide how far she will go to protect him from terrifying forces from her past. And although the premise is simple, Sun effectively utilizes and subverts a bevy of tropes we've seen all too many times to elicit true scares, dread, and mounting tension throughout. A powerfully discomforting depiction of a mother pushed to the edge of evil.
You have no idea what he's capable of.
Pontypool.
Regardless of its small-scale budget and single-location setting, Pontypool is one of the most original and interesting zombie films ever made. Top-shelf character actor Stephen McHattie anchors a truly unique horror film that is full of fascinating diversions from a worn-out genre. Pontypool follows a shock jock radio DJ as he is thrust into a zombie apocalypse unlike any we've ever seen on screen before. Just when you think the genre has ran out of options, something special like this comes along and redefines the possibilities of what we associate with the shambling hordes of the recently undead. A zombie hidden gem absolutely worth your time and attention.
Who are those?
There's a bunch of them. They're people, but they're crazy. They're
Ken, are you there, Ken?
The Voices.
Hey, Jim, give me a break.
Oh, okay, I'll tone it down a little bit.
Before Deadpool and Free Guy, there was a moment where Ryan Reynolds was actually trying to make good movies. And this tour de force horror comedy was undoubtedly his greatest achievement. The Voices is a genre classic, a satirical and demented farce about a serial killer whose life begins to unravel when he finally meets the right girl. With one of my favorite reveal/twist moments in any modern horror movie, The Voices is a seriously underrated, seriously morbid gem that uses all of Ryan Reynolds' best assets with great aplomb. A must-see movie for fans of the genre, and of course of any fan of Ryan Reynolds at his absolute best. This movie is like a morbid and bizarre crossroads between The Big Lebowski and American Psycho, and man, who wouldn't want to see that?
The Midnight Meat Train.
Don't let the pulpy title fool you. The Midnight Meat Train is a slick, serious, and unique ride through a subterranean hell. as an amateur photographer investigates a rash of mysterious and brutal subway murders. Based on the Clive Barker story of the same name, The Midnight Meat Train is not only a fantastic horror movie with one of the best endings ever, but it's also the first major leading role for Bradley Cooper in a feature film. With some amazing and gory special effects, unreal kills, and a fantastic third act, The Midnight Meat Train is a must-see experience for fans of Clive Barker's unique brand of perverse cosmic horror.
The perfect host.
Frasier's David Hyde Pierce turns in a pitch-perfect performance in this wild, satirical, brilliant little horror film. Funny, brutal, and loaded with great little twists, this slice of darkly comedic horror makes for quite a sumptuous meal. After a bank robbery gone wrong, criminal-on-the-run John Taylor makes a brief pit stop to a random house to hide out, only to discover that he's become the sole guest of a dinner party that he will never forget, if he manages to survive. This one will make you realize how underused of a talent David Hyde Pierce truly is, and is a movie that showcases his talents among a plot full of clever subversion, fits of lunacy, and ultimately horror. An underseen, underdiscussed, jet black comedy horror treasure.
It's a cheeky little drop, isn't it?
Splinter.
It's metabolizing. What? Can't believe this. I think it's feeding.
Another fantastic horror film confined to a single location. Splinter is a familiar body horror story told with gusto and loaded with awesome home-brewed practical effects. Following a group of strangers stranded at a gas station during the outbreak of a nightmarish parasite, this movie does a whole lot with a simple location and an obviously small-scale budget. Full of body horror, homages to movies like The Thing and Invasion of the Body Snatchers, and featuring an absolutely fantastic central performance from character actor Shea Whigham, Splinter is a cracking body horror sci-fi gem that starts strong and truly never lets up until its explosive finale.
Eden Lake.
Part of the wave of mid-2000s extreme UK horror, Eden Lake stars Kelly Reilly and a debut performance from Michael Fassbender as a vacationing couple who stumble into an escalating situation with some local punks that devolves into a garish and gory game of cat and mouse. This is not for the faint of heart, but it is a great horror film for those who like unforgiving movies like Funny Games or Speak No Evil. An idyllic vacation quickly slams into a deadly comedy of manners, melting into a story so bleak and horrific that you'll probably need a hot shower by the time the credits roll. A nail-biting, tense, and stomach-churning trip to a countryside vacation from hell.
At your first opportunity, turn around.
Come to Daddy.
It's Dad. He's not how I imagined him.
The less you know about this genre-bending horror comedy, the better, so I'd avoid the trailers to this one, if at all possible. Just know that it stars Elijah Wood and famed character actor Stephen McHattie from Pontypool, also on this list, as an estranged father and son who are meeting for the first time at a remote cabin, to deadly and insane results. The twists in this movie are as elating as they are morbid and bizarre, depicting a family reunion full of reveals that range from brash and bloody to downright bananas. Check this one out for another quirky and engrossing turn from Elijah Wood, and a true horror hidden gem for those who think that they've seen it all.
I know what's happening.
You got no idea what's happening here.
Europa Report.
I want to see if it's reacting to my lights. I'm going to turn them off.
Genuinely hard sci-fi is tough to come by, as are actually good found footage movies. And Europa Report hits both of these categories on the head with ease. Starring Charlton Copley from District 9, Europa Report is a truly underrated gem that was made with deep research into NASA's current capabilities in real-life projects, offering up a stunningly realistic trip across the stars that descends into utter madness by the film's unforgettable third act. Amazing technical feats are achieved on a shoestring budget here, and while it isn't a perfect experience, it's one of the most unique sci-fi horror stories from the past decade. Fans of 2001, Gravity, and Alien will be at home with this rather genius and overlooked film that follows a team of astronauts as they travel to the moon of Jupiter to investigate a mysterious and potentially alien energy signal.
This really is a new first step for mankind.
Apostle.
Easily one of the best pieces of content Netflix has ever made. Apostle stars Dan Stevens, probably one of the most underrated actors out there, as a drifter who infiltrates a religious cult on an isolated island in search of his missing sister in 1905. Shades of Midnight Mass and The Wicker Man make up this folksy, classically made horror tale that would make Tim Burton and Robert Eggers blush with its top-level depiction of Victorian dread. A truly bleak, horrifying epic into the heart of human darkness, Apostle is a dark rumination on faith and blind devotion from Gareth Evans, the director of The Raid 1 and 2, a horror-filled period piece epic that went under most people's radars, but a movie that is absolutely worth your time.
Your eyes. They've seen things.
Lord of Illusions.
Clive Barker is easily one of the most stylistic, prolific horror authors in history. But when it comes to adaptations of his work, he's only ever directed 3 of his own films, all of which are pretty much classics. The first 2, Hellraiser and Nightbreed, are equally infamous, but his third and final directorial effort, 1995's Lord of Illusions, is a gem absolutely worth uncovering. Lord of Illusions is a slice of absolute 90s insanity, a grand guignol look at dueling magicians in LA, set to a detective noir story starring Scott Bakula. I know, but he's good in this. Lord of Illusions is rife with amazing and gross special effects, a dark and unruly tone, and one of the most compelling villains you'll ever see in any horror movie. This is a Lovecraftian nightmare of a film, and while it won't connect with some, it's an absolute classic of its decade, and a horror movie that every fan of the genre needs to have seen. This movie gave me nightmares for years as a kid, and if you love this one as much as me, make sure to read the book The Scarlet Gospels, which pits Scott Bakula's character from this film against Pinhead from Hellraiser in an epic battle that takes place in the actual depths of hell. Anyway, Lord of Illusions is a great cult horror gem. And also, 90s Famke Janssen. Yow!
Out of Darkness.
The only movie on this list to be set 45,000 years ago, Out of Darkness is a rare historical horror film that follows a desperate band of early humans as they try to settle a new and terrifying land full of unknowable dangers. With dialogue fully comprised of a heavily researched and now defunct ancient language constructed solely for the film, it's clear that the people who made this movie were committed to a level of authenticity that bursts from nearly every frame. A great crossroad between survival horror and a classic creature feature, Out of Darkness plays with its unique time period to elicit a wide range of terrifying scenarios that feel nearly inescapable, dropping you into a pit of dread that encapsulates the struggles and horrors that befell our prehistoric ancestors. A hypnotic and captivating slice of ancient dread. Joshua is an underrated horror gem that stars Sam Rockwell and Vera Farmiga as exhausted parents who must come to terms with the fact that their young son may be far more disturbed than they could have ever imagined. This is an incredibly well-acted, taut, and realistic portrayal of familial desperation and ultimately tragedy. A movie with terrifying implications sure to give any new parent a rash of nightmares. Joshua is a classic take on the spooky kid horror subgenre and is one of the finest entries to boot. Believable, horrifying, and ultimately rather bleak, Joshua chronicles the destruction of a family through calculated and terrifying turns that reveal the titular son as a force of unstoppable malice. Anchored by a great cast and convincing performances, this is an indie horror gem that is both deeply unnerving and utterly unforgettable.
I think you're sick, Josh.
I don't feel sick. Not at all.
Martyrs.
2 warnings up front. Do not watch the American remake of Martyrs. And secondly, do not watch this movie if you aren't a truly seasoned horror fan. Because this is one of the most hardcore movies ever made, and it's not for the faint of heart. Martyrs is my second favorite horror movie of the past 25 years, behind Inside, found earlier on this list. And it's a movie that will positively break you. What starts as a grim kidnapping story spirals into one of the most disturbing, transcendent, morbid films ever devised. There is no end to the depravity found in this one, with one spot-on review on the DVD cover declaring, "Martyrs makes Saw look like Sesame Street." Yeah, that's about right. Ultimately, this is the 2001 A Space Odyssey of torture horror. Overlong, cerebral, life-changing, and nothing less than epic, Martyrs will take you to the deepest and darkest pits of human blackness until you're positively choking. There is no other way to describe or recommend this film, but to those who haven't experienced Martyrs, steel yourself for an experience that will haunt you for the rest of your life. There's no other way to state it. This movie is immortally fucked. Good luck.
Frailty.
You didn't think anyone knew about that, did you? But God saw you.
Dad, don't, please!
What? And you can't escape God's wrath!
Written and directed by absolute legend Bill Paxton, Frailty is a truly worthwhile horror thriller with some fantastic performances and an unforgettable twist. Always loved this movie since first seeing it in theaters as a kid, and it's got some career best performances from Matthew McConaughey and Bill Paxton that make this a classic religious horror film worthy of this list. Following the investigation of a serial killer known solely as God's Hand, Frailty tells a twisted horror story that spans several decades as the history of the God's Hand killer is recounted and revealed. Everyone is at the top of their game in this shocking, mature, and fascinating slice of early 2000s goodness that proves that McConaughey's talents as a Southern investigator began long before True Detective Season 1, a Southern fried serial killer classic.
Excision.
A grisly, satirical, uniquely wild movie about a deeply disturbed girl who dreams of being a surgeon, Excision is a truly disgusting, Cronenberg-esque horror film that will stick with you for a long time. You know you're in for a wild ride when Tracy Lords is playing a conservative Christian mom, and this movie gleefully blends pitch-black comedy with oozing red horror. Fans of movies like The Substance will feel at home in this exaggerated and often disgusting horror satire, as an outcast teenager practices her surgical skills that seem to blend with her increasingly violent psychosexual fantasies. A surreal and deeply unsettling black comedy that concludes in gory and jaw-dropping fashion.
Life.
We're looking at the first proof of life.
Quickly critically dismissed at the time for being a mere Alien clone, Life is actually a riveting, slick sci-fi horror film with an absolutely fantastic cast. Jake Gyllenhaal, Ryan Reynolds, and the always spectacular Rebecca Ferguson lead a well-researched, quite believable, and absolutely thrilling sci-fi horror film with one of the most memorable, fully realized movie monsters in quite some time. Once the horror kicks off in this one, it seemingly never lets up, offering up one of the best sci-fi horror movies of the modern age, and a movie that was shockingly passed over by most general audiences in 2017. A cracking sci-fi horror gem and an unforgettable creature feature with a great cast and some truly well-realized and hard-researched special effects, Life is a journey to space well worth taking.
My Amityville Horror.
I believe that there is a such thing as evil, and I was a victim of that.
Few films, let alone documentaries, have unnerved and unsettled me like My Amityville Horror. A documentary interviewing Daniel Lutz, who was merely a young boy when he lived in the Amityville house during its initial infamous haunting, finally breaking his silence as a middle-aged man about what he experienced as a child, and it is absolutely traumatic and deeply terrifying to hear his account that will pretty much stay with you forever. While this is a documentary, the recounting of the Amityville haunting from someone who was actually there as a child is some truly nightmare-generating content, rendering My Amityville Horror as one of the most chilling documentaries out there. Despite the supposed debunking of the Amityville Horror as a hoax, this documentary will have you absolutely spellbound. as Daniel Lutz describes the events that transpired in the house from a first-person point of view. A goosebump-raising account of a poltergeist that will truly unsettle you, whether you choose to believe it's real or not.
Maniac.
The mages have found the last true romantic.
I don't know about all that.
A remake produced by Hills Have Eyes and high-tension director Alex Aja, Maniac is a frankly gross and unique horror experiment that takes you into the first-person view of a serial killer for the entirety of the film. So many creative, disgusting, and positively brutal moments are exploited from that premise, and it is a film that will stick in the blackness of your subconscious for months. It's absolutely unsettling being inside the mind and mental state of Elijah Wood's titular Maniac, as you watch his killing spree unfold directly from his twisted perspective for the runtime of the film. Horrifying, gory as hell, and constantly unique, Maniac is a horror remake well worth experiencing for yourself.
Stop staring. You're missing a movie.
The Ritual.
As a warning.
We shouldn't be here.
Awash in Swedish vistas and doused with Nordic dread, The Ritual is a gorgeously shot and sleekly produced film with woodland photography and special effects that outshine most mainstream theater horror releases from the past few years. The plot of the film is a tried and true horror trope that has been used and abused to a great extent, as we follow four friends on an annual holiday as they trek through the Swedish wilderness. Wrong turns and bad decisions are made, and before you know it, the holiday devolves into a verdant green nightmare with some truly excellent creature designs and special effects along the way. This is a top-tier atmospheric horror epic with some deep messaging and some even deeper moments of terror. The Ritual is a tightly directed and stylish journey through the woods that you won't soon forget.
Butterfly Kisses.
Butterfly Kisses is a Russian doll of movies inside of movies, following a documentary crew as they document a wedding video producer as he cuts together a mysterious box of found footage recovered in a garage that leads to a mysterious cryptid that lives in a tunnel. It sounds like a lot, but as the movie goes on, it presents a deeply mysterious yarn that just keeps turning and unveiling in its cosmic dread. Butterfly Kisses is a phenomenal, scary, unnerving experience, and the plight of the central character in this one had me literally choked up with aggravation and dismay by the end of the film. One of the best, most effective found footage horror movies ever, chronicling the appearances and hauntings of a town's local urban legend until the investigation eventually turns deadly. A unique and unforgettable horror experience.
When Evil Lurks.
When Evil Lurks is the kind of pus-filled, horror-laced nightmare that calls back to everything, from the best of Sam Raimi to the most garish of French new wave horror from the early 2000s. Following two brothers in Argentina during the outbreak of a demonic virus, When Evil Lurks is a jet-black chunk of Argentinian dank that's going to put your entire life into utter chaos for hours after watching it. This was my favorite horror film of 2023 and is undoubtedly one of the best horror films of the decade, with some of the most powerful and shocking set pieces and moments you could ever imagine in a movie like this. One of the most unique demonic possession films I've ever seen, When Evil Lurks is a new classic and a rollicking nightmare that demands your attention. Also, oh my god, that scene with the dog. The moment with the dog.
The Gate.
You mean you guys were serious about that demon stuff? Demons? What kind?
Looking for a Goonies-esque horror hidden gem from the 1980s? Look no further than the fantastic film, The Gate. This one is good for the whole family, while still being chock full of fantastic stop-motion horror VFX and frankly terrifying creature moments. The plot concerns two boys, one played by a 9-year-old Stephen Dorff. Deacon Frost, what up?
How you doing, Chief?
As they uncover a demonic vinyl LP buried in their backyard. After they, of course, play the record, all hell breaks loose, literally, in this underrated 80s horror classic. Somehow The Gate didn't connect with wide audiences upon its release in 1987, but it still stands as a fantastic gem that remains mostly lost in horror history to this day.
The Tripper.
Now, Nancy, you know young people today No respect for anything.
Let's take a brief moment among the waves of bleak horror to highlight a slasher comedy, because that subgenre seems awfully absent from this list so far. In 2006's The Tripper, Pee Wee Herman, aka Paul Rubens, owns and operates a huge, drug-filled music festival in the woods, in a town where Tom Jane is the chief of police, in a film directed by David Arquette about a deranged serial killer who dresses like Ronald Reagan and slaughters hippies with a hatchet. Need I say more? This is a hilarious, satirical, gory comedy horror film full of great comedic character actors and a truly enigmatic villain, set amongst a free love fest full of drugged-out weirdos. The Tripper is a trippy, funny, gory night at the movies that you won't soon regret.
Pandorum.
Someone's been through here.
Hello?
Fans of Event Horizon and The Descent will find a lot to love about Pandorum, a sci-fi horror film starring Dennis Quaid and the endlessly underrated Ben Foster. Besides some goofy, over-stylized editing choices, this is a sleek and brutal horror movie that packs a fantastic ending punch. A great little hidden gem in the horror sci-fi realm, a subgenre that can never have enough entries. Two members of a deep space mission wake up from cryosleep to find that their ship has become a cosmic house of horrors. In a pretty damn good movie with some awesome visuals and a great cast, Pandorum is a pastiche of great sci-fi horror tropes made into a digestible, exciting, and high-octane hour and a half. And oh man, the ending of this one, what a batshit insane twist that I didn't see coming. A pulpy but entertaining ride through hell, in space. Space hell. Enjoy.
The Devil's Backbone.
Quite simply, one of the greatest films ever made. This is director Guillermo del Toro at the peak of his creative talents, offering up a ghost story at an orphanage that is brilliant, moving, and gory. This is a tremendously unique film that everybody on Earth should see. It's the kind of horror film that simply doesn't exist anymore. A truly moving classic that, in my opinion, even outshines Pan's Labyrinth. The Devil's Backbone is quite possibly the best film that Guillermo del Toro ever directed. I don't like the one where the lady has sex with the fish. Pass. Yet, it remains mostly hidden due to its early release in the director's career. This is a foreign language horror classic and one of the best ghost stories ever told.
Lovely Molly.
He's here! He's here! Nobody out! He's right here! He's right there!
Eduardo Sanchez, director of the Blair Witch Project, returns to the genre that he helped invent with the found footage horror film Lovely Molly. Or I guess it's semi-found footage. That's why it's never made it onto my found footage lists. It's got some non-found footage elements. Anyway, what starts as a fairly standard possession story devolves into a truly dark, incredibly desolate portrayal of mental illness, with some absolutely stirring images that will stick with you for a long time, especially the absolutely harrowing final shot of this movie. Lovely Molly is about a supernatural presence that menaces a newlywed couple after they move into the wife's long-abandoned childhood home. An atmospheric descent into madness, Lovely Molly is a semi-found footage horror classic from one of the most pivotal and forgotten directors in the genre. A nightmarish and truly unsettling film.
Father's Day.
Father's Day is undoubtedly the greatest modern-day trauma film, and one of the most brutally insane and morbidly sick movies I've ever had the pleasure of seeing. A man obsessed with exacting brutal, violent revenge on the person who murdered his dad joins an eager priest and a hot-headed street hustler on an epic quest to find and defeat the mythical monster known as the Fuckman. Yeah. Hell yeah. In all seriousness, this might be the most graphic movie I've ever seen? Not positive, but there are some moments in this one that will haunt me for an eternity, in this bombastic, cheesy, exploitative horror gem that is positively overflowing with disgusting special effects, hilarious gags, and a grindhouse vibe that would please trauma fans and cheesy horror epic stans alike. This one's for the dads. Happy Father's Day.
The Divide.
Usually, the end of the world can seem pretty bleak, but there honestly isn't a bleaker depiction of the apocalypse than what you'd find in the 2011 horror film The Divide. A group of strangers survive a nuclear attack by barricading themselves in a fallout shelter of their apartment building. But as time rolls on and resources begin to dwindle, the survivors result to a bevy of crimes born out of the pitch-black insanity of their situation that may very well turn your stomach and suck the very life out of you while watching it. Things go from bad to worse to, oh my god, ew, in this one, as you watch a group of seemingly well-adjusted people devolve into chaotic and desperate monsters. This movie makes The Walking Dead seem like an utter cakewalk, as the survivors of the nuclear attack result in the most sickening and desperate acts that you could ever imagine just to go on living. A horrifically morose examination of how the monsters inside of us are far more terrifying than the ones that seemingly lurk in the dark. The Divide is a movie that will upset and ultimately conquer your spirit.
You want to survive? You listen to me.
The Ruins.
Based on one of the best contemporary horror novels / great beach reads of the past 20 years, The Ruins is a classic spin on the monster movie yarn that blends vacation horror with the bleakest of circumstances. A group of friends unwisely decide to explore a Mayan temple off the beaten path while vacationing in Mexico, which of course leads to a horrific and disgusting disaster that none of them can possibly escape. This is a wild, action-packed hidden gem with an unexpected antagonist, set amongst an idyllic jungle that quickly becomes the killing grounds for an unknowable force of nature. A great, straightforward creature feature with solid performances and some truly skin-crawling kills along the way.
Mom and Dad.
Yeah, you put your right foot in, you take your right foot out, you do the hokey and you fucking work it all out.
You may have thought that Nicolas Cage would have ended up in this video for his fantastic Lovecraftian nightmare Color Out of Space, or his endlessly over-discussed film Mandy, but nah. For a truly epic dose of Cage rage, look no further than the criminally underseen 2017 horror film Mom and Dad, about a world where suddenly everyone's parents go insane and start trying to kill their children. The movie is a batshit insane horror black comedy with a great premise and some nail-biting set pieces. But the real reason you need to check out this movie is to watch Nick Cage have the absolute time of his life. There's a moment in this movie with a pool table that, in my opinion, is the fucking craziest performance meltdown in Nick Cage's entire career. And if that isn't enough to sell you, then I don't know what to tell you. This is a funny, horrifying, and pulse-pounding hidden gem that will have you laughing as much as you'll be covering your eyes with a pillow.
The Black Coat's Daughter.
Before Longlegs, before The Monkey, Oz Perkins directed my favorite movie in his whole filmography, the lesser-known cerebral masterpiece, The Black Coat's Daughter. I feel like this movie really utilizes Perkins' talent as a writer and director to their best potential, offering up a truly hypnotic foray into satanic horror that didn't feel out of place or forced like the supernatural elements of Longlegs. Without spoiling anything, you could say that there are some really creative casting choices in this movie, with some truly dedicated performances from both Emma Roberts and Kiernan Shipka, telling a story set across a decade that actually uses the passage of time in really unexpected ways. The story follows two Catholic schoolgirls that get left behind at their boarding school over winter break as the other girls leave, as rumors begin to spread that the nuns are actually Satanists. This movie is like The Holdovers plus Satan, giving off this really nostalgic, nightmarish vibe with a couple moments that will absolutely stick in the darkest parts of your subconscious. The Black Coat's Daughter is not only Oz Perkins's directorial debut, but in my opinion, it's the strongest film he's made so far in his career.
Taxidermia.
Okay, I'll admit it, this movie is really fucked up.
Brother,
But if you can handle extreme body horror and truly twisted sexual content, you may find yourself in love with Taxidermia. This is a movie that feels like Wes Anderson and David Cronenberg's twisted love child. A cutesy and disgusting portrait of 3 generations of sexual deviants from the same family tree. Taxidermia paints a portrait of hereditary perversion and inherited mental illness in graphic, hilarious, and absolutely unique ways. Taxidermia is an incredible film that I can't believe more cinephiles haven't experienced, falling somewhere in between happiness and Salo in its absolute depravity. Unlike any movie you've ever seen, and honestly, that's probably for the best.
Yellow Brick Road.
You ever see a bad movie that you just cannot shake? And as the years roll on, you look back on it fondly despite its various issues. Yellow Brick Road is that movie for me, an utterly strange yet somehow mesmerizing horror film that's so profoundly weird that it's stuck in my skin like a splinter that I just can't pull. In 1940, the entire population of Friar, New Hampshire walks up a winding mountain trail, leaving everything behind as they disappear from history. In 2008, the first official expedition into the wilderness attempts to solve the mystery of the lost citizens of Friar. A low-budget, deeply cerebral head trip plays out from here, in a startling and mysterious movie that still calls out to me from the ether almost 2 decades from its release. Feverish and off-putting in a David Lynch type of way, Yellow Brick Road is an ominous and confounding movie that is well worth the journey into the woods.
Ravenous.
Ravenous has always been one of my favorite movies of all time, and it only seems to get better with age. A twisted historical cannibal story with a wicked sense of humor, Ravenous bombed on its initial release in 1999, but has since amassed a pretty strong cult following. Guy Pearce turns in one of his most committed performances ever as a disgraced military officer who finds himself banished to a remote outpost in the woods of Colorado, where a deadly game of cat and mouse kicks off after the arrival of a mysterious and dangerous stranger. Robert Carlyle is literally godly in this movie, and it's easily one of, if not the best cannibal horror movie ever made. Ravenous is a delicious, subversive classic that opens with a quote from Bart Simpson, and then proceeds to only get weirder and crazier until the credits finally roll. Eat this one up immediately.
The Medium.
Few found footage movies can be weighed against the whole of horror history, but The Medium is a great case for the importance and effectiveness of the subgenre. A horrifying story of a shaman's inheritance in the Isan region of Thailand, The Medium plays with Thai mysticism and possession lore to brew up a truly chilling horror experience. Epic in scale and set amongst the scenic and serene landscapes of Thailand, The Medium is a gorgeously shot and utterly disturbing trip to a foreign land where magic and demonology are integrated into the culture of its people. A mystical, fully realized horror epic loaded with chilling set pieces and terrifying moments, The Medium is easily one of the greatest found footage movies of all time and is an absolute horror classic in the making as well. Brain Dead. Brain Dead, or as it was known in American video rental stores, Dead Alive, is a 1992 horror comedy written and directed by Peter Jackson. Yeah, that Peter Jackson. And this movie is a perfect summation of what made Jackson such a young and promising talent from New Zealand in the 90s. A classic zombie tale kicks off when a woman is bit by a Sumatra rat monkey at the zoo, unleashing a wave of undead infected on an unsuspecting white picket fence town in suburban New Zealand. This movie used to hold the record for the most fake blood ever used in a single film, and it's the perfect textbook example of a quote-unquote splatter film, as the movie eventually devolves into one of the most bombastically violent gore fests in the history of the genre. Canted angles, loony performances, and truly absurd levels of cartoon violence make Brain Dead one of the zaniest horror movies ever devised.
Party's over.
Coherence.
Coherence is a low-budget sci-fi horror movie with a healthy helping of ambition, pushing the boundaries of the genre with a truly mind-boggling script and a high-concept idea that flourishes into an hour and a half of mind-bending madness. 8 friends at a dinner party experience a truly troubling chain of events due to the malevolent influence of a passing comet, in a movie that's both existentially terrifying while remaining scientifically intriguing. This is cosmic horror done to pitch perfection, with the effects of the comet twisting the reality and minds of the dinner guests until the movie descends into a chaotic, psychedelic nightmare. One of those movies where you realize how helpless we would be at the whim of a cosmic unknowable force. Coherence is a sci-fi horror movie that crosses galaxies and dimensions, all on a threadbare budget. A low-tech, high-concept horror classic.
Terrified.
At long last, we've reached the final selection, and it just so happens to be one of the strongest horror films of the last 25 years. Terrified is the first feature film from director Damien Ruña, the Argentinian horror maestro whose film When Evil Lurks also showed up earlier on the list. A town outside of Buenos Aires begins to unravel as a series of truly shocking and unexplainable deaths spread across the city like a virus. There is a dark and unstoppable chaos to the events of this movie, as the horrors of the outbreak seem to break the laws of our reality, literally raising the dead as a horde of specters, demons, and deaths cover Buenos Aires like a violent rash. This is clearly the work of a master horror director, as Ruña paints a gruesome portrait of a city in chaos at the hands of an unspeakable evil. One of the best horror movies ever, and a hidden gem that's worth its weight in gold. Get ready to be terrified and Stuckmanized. And that is it, my good people. That is the list of 50 horror gems. Like I said at the beginning of the video, this was cut out of a list of 150 choices that I had. So if you liked what you saw here, please send all the love and messages, thoughts and prayers and well wishes, and I will produce yet another list of 50 hidden horror gems. Also, what would make me the most happy is if you guys watch some of these movies and reported in the comments below your thoughts of the new ones that you've experienced because of this list. And as always, I'd love to hear your guys' picks too, so make sure to share those in the comments as well. Thank you for joining me on the show today, and until next time, I am DS Lyons of the Movie Blues, wishing you a nightmarish beginning to your spring. Bye.
Cause I love you, and I love you, and I love you, and I've seen all your movies, and I love your movies, and I think you're the best.